Hi, welcome to another episode of Start the Week with Wisdom. I'm your host, Bridget Burns, the Executive Director of the University Innovation Alliance.
And I'm Doug Lederman, editor of Inside Higher Ed.
Each week, I partner with a journalist to have a conversation with a sitting college president or chancellor to understand what it's like to navigate this moment, to lead in this moment, and hopefully we give you a bit of inspiration for the week ahead. Welcome to Weekly Wisdom.
This week, we're thrilled to bring you a conversation with the new chancellor of the California State University System, Joseph Castro. Chancellor Castro was most recently served as president of the California State University, Fresno. Joe, great to have you here.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
We're very excited. There's been a lot of excitement about your chancellorship, and I know that this has been probably an awkward time to transition. So that's where we wanted to start off is, how has your transition been into this new role?
Well, thank you. It's been pretty smooth, all things considered. I mean, moving during COVID is not an easy thing, so that was a challenge. But I feel very fortunate to serve at such a consequential time, and because I've been part of the CSU system, and because Chancellor Emeritus White invited me in early on during the transition to be part of conversations, it really helped me hit the ground running in January, and it's been an adventure, that's for sure, no question about that.
So maybe tell us a little bit more about your background, and particularly why this role, why this system matters so much to you, and why this job has seems like it was suited for you to do sometime in your life.
Well, I feel like I'm paying it forward now. I benefited from the leadership of a former chancellor at UC Berkeley back in the 80s who said, I want to diversify my campus geographically, ethnically, racially, and I've benefited from that. I was able to get into the University of California, Berkeley through a program designed to get more students from the Central Valley there. And the grandson of immigrants and first in my family to go to college, that transformed my whole life. And then I spent about 23 years in the UC system. And then I fell in love with the CSU. I had the chance to work as president of Fresno State, and I just love the mission. And I love that we can do things on a scale that make a huge difference in California, but also the nation as the largest, most diverse, and I would argue most consequential public university in America. I feel very fortunate to serve during this time.
What is it about this time in particular that you believe a system with is it close to 500,000 students what kind of difference can it make? What are the issues on which you see Cal State leading and clear, sort of pointing the way for for the rest of the country?
Well, Doug, as you and Bridget know, this has been such a challenging time for so many people across the nation and beyond, and especially for people from underrepresented communities. The pandemic has disproportionately impacted them, and I believe that the CSU is part of a chance to make a change. We're the inflection point, the ability to transform lives, on this scale of 500,000 a year from all different backgrounds. And we have the chance to change not just the individual's life through their education, but their families and whole communities. So that's why, for me, it's so important to serve at this time, because without higher education, I think so many students and families would have many fewer opportunities. And I want the CSU to continue to be part of the solution to expand opportunities for our students and families all across California.
That's great. I'm curious about how your background is fascinating, and it's really wonderful to have someone with your perspective come into this role. I know that right now the transitioning in the midst of COVID had to be wild, but I'm wondering if there were any things that you did to prepare for this transition into leadership, seeking advice, if there was anything you read that was helpful, because I know that you're not the only one who's having to go through this kind of awkward new world in the midst of a new world.
Yeah, well, Bridget, you and I have the same interests in higher education, leadership, and policy. I saw that in your background, and same for me. And I try to reflect on my own experiences. I do a lot of reading. I have a huge number of mentors who've made a positive, transformational difference in my life, and I stay in touch with them. And in terms of this transition, as I was going through the interview process, I discovered, number one, I would be the first Californian to ever serve as the chancellor of the CSU. Hard to believe that, but true. And also the first sitting president of a campus to make that transition. So I was cognizant about the uniqueness of my selection. And at the same time, I wanted to learn from others who've served in positions like this. So I did talk with, of course, at length with Chancellor Emeritus White, who has been a mentor for me for many years and helped immeasurably as we made this transition. Chancellor Emeritus Barry Munitz and I spoke at length. I also consider Mark Udoff and David Gardner from the UC system as mentors, and they really made a very positive difference. And then I reflected on conversations I've had with mentors throughout my life, even some who've passed away, like Carol Tomlinson Kesey. She was the first founding chancellor who was a woman in our country when she founded UC Merced, and I was part of her team. And I just reflected on all those lessons, and I continue to do that and read as much as I can. I've been reading a lot of books lately, President Obama's book, and just finished Jimmy Carter's, the one that Jonathan Alter wrote about Jimmy Carter, and just trying to learn leadership lessons from a lot of people. And I listen. That was something my grandfather taught me, and I try to learn from all of my interactions, and that's really helped me, I think, in these early days, and I hope it'll continue to help me in the coming years.
So it's obviously early. I think you said you were just 2 months in.
Yes.
Barely. But one of the, in addition, actually, it's fascinating that those facts about being the first sitting Cal State president and the first California, that just kind of blows my mind, honestly. But making the transition from a presidency, a campus presidency, to a system is obviously one of the many pretty significant transitions that you're making right now. And I'm curious if there are, early on, recognizing that what you've seen so far, that and obviously what you heard from some of your mentors who are obviously some of whom had made that same transition. But what's your early sense about what you're seeing that's different, and how are you navigating that?
Thank you. I've been very reflective about this. On the one hand, I loved being president of Fresno State. It was so deeply meaningful, and I was in a bit of a comfort zone there. I was finally figuring out the rhythm of that after about 8 years. And even though we were getting curveballs with COVID, I felt like I was really understanding it. We were seeing the fruits of our labor from the teamwork in my early years of my presidency, and so that was challenging to think about leaving there. But for me, I think it's an opportunity to serve in a new way. And I've always thought, and thankfully my wife supports this, we've been open to learning and growing. And this has been quite a growth experience, Doug. I spend my days much differently than I did in Fresno. I try to support the presidents as much as I can. So if they call me at 7 in the morning or 7 at night, I'm there to listen to them, to be a sounding board, to support them. And Chancellor Emeritus White was so helpful to me when I needed that. And I'd call a couple of times a year, and those, times were really helpful. So I've tried to keep that in mind. I've been doing a lot of work building relationships with the legislature, with the governor, and our budget is much better than it looked like it was going to be a few months ago. Yeah. So I'm very encouraged by that. And then the trustees, I knew them, but I'm getting to know them better. And I'm enjoying that part of the job, working with legislators. I have a policy background, and it's something that I understand. It's just very different, and I'm still kind of processing, as anybody would, the end of my presidency and what's next. And so it's exciting on the one hand, and also mixed in with a little bit of sadness about what I was doing before, and I love that too. So I'll be able to share more in the coming months and years, but those are some, kind of immediate thoughts as of the second month here.
I'm curious about, it seems like you sought a lot of guidance from others and you tried to reflect coming into this, whether it's about the transition or just leadership in general. What's the best advice that has served you as a leader? If there was any that came recently or that you rely upon regularly?
Well, I mentioned it earlier. I think my ability to listen carefully before I speak and before I make big decisions has served me well. I learned that from being raised by my grandparents, and I listened a lot more than I spoke as a kid. That's helped me because I've been able to learn a lot before I've needed to express a point of view. And as you know, a lot of the things that we deal with as presidents or chancellors are things that are highly contested. They might even be 50-50. So I really try to listen and learn. And even when people believe that I've made a decision that they don't support in general, they at least know that I listened and they understand the rationale. I've always tried to be principled and consistent in my approach to leadership. And I believe I'm the same person in private as I am in public. And I think that helps. That consistent, principled decision-making has served me well. And I'm going to continue that as chancellor.
There's a lot that we've seen and learned because of this moment. And one of the things you referred to earlier is we've seen disproportionate impact of COVID and the recession on the educational paths of community college students, underrepresented minority groups, Black and Latino, et cetera. What are your thoughts as we, knock wood, sort of slowly begin to transition back to something a little bit more like normal over the next 6-12 months? What are the things that you believe a system like Cal State can do, you working with the presidents and to try to avoid having some of those students that that have been waylaid not lost entirely, and ensuring that we don't have more people waylaid going forward?
I think this is a time for healing. Frankly, there's just been so much stress and strain and loss in so many different ways, and I think it's really important for us to be as reasonable and flexible and compassionate as we can. So in my early days as chancellor, I'll just give you some examples. I announced that there'd be no tuition increase for the upcoming year because I know there was a lot of stress about that. As I listened to the student leaders, they told me basic needs are their number one priority. And I've leaned into that with them, and they know that, and we've been able to secure additional resources. The faculty and staff are stressed in their own ways. Many were worried that I was going to support furloughs or more layoffs, and I announced in my first month that we were not going to do those things if the budget was going to hold, and thankfully the budget is holding. So I've tried to make these decisions to lower the stress level so that our students can focus on learning, our faculty can focus on teaching and research, and our staff can focus on supporting the whole infrastructure and not worry about some of these things. And I think looking to the fall, I'm just going to try to be as transparent about where we're at as possible. I do believe that we can be in person for a majority of our courses if the current plans progress as we expect. But as you know, these things change from day to day or hour to hour. And if that happens, we're going to be very honest about that and say, we'll have to make some adjustments. And I hope people will understand that we're in a very unique environment. So that's what I'm hoping to do, and to provide the presidents and the campuses with as many resources and support as possible, so that as we move to that new normal, we have that in place, and then we can benefit from the innovation that's occurred during this very stressful time. And I think we're going to a new place. And I'm excited about that, especially when the stress moves away and people are feeling better and healthier. I think there's going to be a lot of interesting things that are going to come about in the CSU.
That's great. I'm curious about if, I've seen some folks, obviously Zoom has affected all of us. We're interacting differently, but I'm wondering if navigating and leading in the midst of a pandemic, multiple organizations now, how has this changed your leadership in any way? Is it, either better, hopefully for the better, but is there any ways that you have noticed that you've developed either more resilience or just it's helped you evolve further as a leader?
Absolutely. I feel like I've grown immeasurably during this time. As I mentioned before, I try to learn, I try to grow constantly, but my growth, I felt it in a different way over the last year and over the last 2 months as well. For me, what I have found, one of the major lessons is to not get too worked up one way or the other about a given option that might seem crazy. Because what I've found during the pandemic is something that's crazy one day is quite reasonable the next day or the next week. And so I've been flexible as much as possible on tactics and strategies. But I've really tried to stay honed into the mission and the values. And for the CSU, it's been, the safety of everybody concerned, number one, and then continued education success for our students, number two, and trying to manage those two guiding principles. So I would say it's made me a stronger leader. I'm listening even more carefully, especially since we're on Zoom and you're not in the room and not able to see all the kind of facial expressions in the same way or body movements. And I've just tried to be even more patient than I was before, so that the decisions that we make are really the best ones possible. And if somebody's feeling uncomfortable, again, I want to lean into that and understand it and adjust if we need to make the decision better.
Go ahead, Bridget.
Well, so I am curious about, this is a very anxious time, and I want to lean further into kind of giving folks a taste of what it's like to have you as their leader.
Sure.
What we notice is that we're kind of trying through this show, monitoring somewhat the mental health of higher ed, but also just how people are showing up and how they're experiencing things. And it seems right now people are having a hard time because it's coming up on the 1 year, very sensitive about remembering going into a 2-week lockdown, all that kind of stuff. What kinds of things are you saying to your team or to folks in the CSU to help them navigate this moment? If you had to give words of inspiration to folks at home, could you share with us what you're sharing with your people?
Absolutely. I think the first thing is to acknowledge the stress. And I even provide examples of things that I've heard that I can share, just because I think the students and faculty, staff, my colleagues, they appreciate that I've heard it, that I've processed it and understood it. And then secondly is just to be to be the person to remind everyone about why we're doing this important work. And for me, as I mentioned before, I fell in love with the CSU 8 years ago. The mission is so inspiring. The scale, the potential impact that we can have together is enormous. And we've made such progress, and I can actually see our trajectory because I've been a president in the system, and I can see that we're headed for even greater heights of success. And that's what I try to remind our folks, that's really what it's all about as we understand the challenges that are in the near term, and just to be optimistic about the future once we can be vaccinated and safer in this new normal. And I find that when that happens, people in general say, yeah, that is why I work for the CSU. And even though these are challenging times, I feel like we're the lucky ones. We get to serve in such an important university system with just a very inspirational mission.
So we've talked, and obviously a lot of us have focused by necessity on some of the things of some of the elements of the pandemic that have been difficult and challenging for our people and taking care of our students and employees, et cetera. There's also, I think I'm hearing more hopefulness as people are looking ahead to identifying things that we have seen and done and learned that might really be useful going forward. So I'm curious what you think about what we've done over the past year that might stick and actually benefit the way we operate higher education institutions individually and collectively.
Absolutely. Well, I think first of all, the resilience of our students has been just amazing. Our success rates are higher than ever before. I'm still waiting for the final fall data, but the spring showed that, and they've stayed in school. Thankfully, we've not seen a lot of melt. We did see fewer applications this year, but I'm cautiously optimistic that we're going to hold up on the enrollment side, and that's unusual, as you know, from around the country. So that's very encouraging. And our faculty, pivoted in 1 week to go completely virtual, and now we're doing some virtual, some in person. They've really stretched. Our faculty and staff have really stretched, and they're doing that while they're raising children who are doing school in their homes and helping with elderly parents and others, and our students are going through this as well. So that actually is the one thing I think that brings folks together, is that we're challenged together. And I just try to encourage everybody to be as reasonable and compassionate and flexible as possible. And then again, when the stress of the pandemic goes away, I think there are going to be a number of faculty who say, I learned a lot during that time, and I'm going to do things differently. I'm not going to go back into the classroom and do everything the way I did before. And students, some of them are going to opt for more hybrid or virtual education. I remember in Fresno, there were so many students who had trouble getting to campus because they didn't have good transportation, and we were funding transit systems and so forth. Well, I think for some, they may say, well, I'll come to campus, fewer times a week, and that'll work for me, and I'll do some of these courses virtually. So I do see a different sort of approach that comes from all this. Again, without the stress of the pandemic, I think the innovation is going to continue, and we're going to be able to have a whole new model of serving our talented and diverse students.
Well, what folks that's a perfect way to end. And what folks had warned me about you is that you were very, very calm, great listener, and really likable. And I feel like my blood pressure is incredibly low from this conversation. You've put I feel very, very at ease. It's similar to when Alexander Cartwright from UCF, very kind of chill vibe. It's nice because, you never want to leave a conversation with higher anxiety. So it's wonderful to meet you, and we're really excited to see what you do with the CSU. It's such a critical space for the rest of the country. And Doug, as always, wonderful to have you. Thanks for porting in from the woods of West Virginia on a hotspot. I mean, this is some pretty innovative stuff that you've made happen.
You know it. Great. Chancellor Castro, thanks for being here. It was great to see you again.
Great to see both of you. Thanks for inviting me. I look forward to
anytime.
With you. Great.
Now that you've been on Weekly Wisdom, you can come back anytime. We're always happy to break news here. So,
Sounds
all right,
great.
We'll see you later.
Okay. Take care.
Bye-bye, guys.